Really thrilled to be here with all of you today. As you know, is Earth Day, and yesterday was Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so I think that it's just a perfect time for us to recognize just the magnitude of the stakes of the issues that we're dealing with. It's our home and our values and our future. And it is this crazy moment, excuse me, it's this crazy moment in our history where there's this plasticity that we haven't seen since 1945. And there's this great sadness because I think we're all losing friends and loved ones. And it's creativity. I always say at every moment, in every hospital, there are people crying in two wings. And some of the people are crying because they lost a loved one, and some of the people are crying because of a birth. And that's part of our human condition. And that's this moment that we're in. And it reminds me of this moment, and I've been talking with a number of people about this, that we had a moment after World War I that was kind of like this. And the good guys understood that, and the bad guys understood it. And the bad guys did a better job of organizing than the good guys. And that's how we got World War II. And after World War II, we finally recognized that the stakes were so high, we had to come together and do things better. And now we're in this same kind of creative moment, but we don't have an FDR. And I said this on our last call. And that means that we all have to divide up that role and play it ourselves. And it's an awesome responsibility, I think, that we all have. And our group, it's been incredible growth over the last few weeks that we've been working together. We have people as part of our community now from 30 countries, including former prime ministers, former governors, university presidents, superstar high schoolers from the Model UN, and so many people have stepped forward in just a really amazing collaborative effort. But some of the people on this call are people who weren't on that first call, so I'm just going to give a little bit of background of where this began. About a month ago, I was asked to give a talk for Singularity University, where I'm on faculty. And this issue that was burning in my soul, I spoke about how I just felt that the core issue that we were facing was this fundamental mismatch between the global and shared nature of the biggest existential challenges we're facing and the national way we've organized ourselves to address them. And that's why, in my view, we're not addressing any of the big challenges. And whether it's deadly pathogens, climate change, ecosystem destruction, weapons of mass destruction, it's all the same story. It's all the same collective action problem. And because I saw the biggest challenge as structural, it seemed to me that the most meaningful response also had to be structural, that we had to look at just how power was configured in the world, and that we have these two legs of a stool, and a two-legged stool is wobbly. And so we have the leg of nation states, which is the most powerful form of organization. We have the international organizations, those states created in the aftermath of the Second World War, when they recognized the instability of the balance of power system, but the nation states never let the UN system realize its full potential. And the thing that was missing was the collective voice of our common humanity, that everybody on Earth wants to have a system, a structure that protects us from deadly pathogens and ecosystem destruction and all of those things. And that the foundation of doing that had to be a much deeper conception of interdependence, that we're all connected, we're all humans, and that it's not just I look out for me and you look out for you. It's that my looking out for you is my way of looking out for me. And if we needed something to teach us that lesson, it's this blasted virus, because that is showing us that we're all one interconnected humanity. And now, even if we're lucky here in the Northern Hemisphere, and this is some kind of seasonal virus, it's going to devastate the Southern Hemisphere. And that's our business, because if it goes south and there are weak public health infrastructures and it mutates and worsens and then comes back here in the fall, we're all worse off. So our health resides not just in our health system, but in everybody's health system. And that's why coming together in this way, it's not an act of charity. It may be charitable. It's an act of self-preservation for all of us. So that talk went viral. Everyone, please mute yourself if you can. That talk went viral, and then I stayed up all night and I drafted the first declaration of global interdependence, and I sent it around on my personal list. Many of you are on it, and the response was amazing, and it felt like there was something there. So I called that first meeting, and Vanessa volunteered on the first day. She said, I'm a professional executive assistant. She worked for Lazard. She goes, I want to volunteer to help. And she's really, I don't think any of us would be here without Vanessa. So the response was amazing. We had an incredible call 3 weeks ago. And we heard from experts in participatory democracy and global campaigns. We together discussed the concept of interdependence. We talked about the best process for creating a better declaration, with mine as the starting point, but the new one is just 1,000 times better. We divided ourselves into 8 working groups, and those working groups have been really working very, very hard over the last 3 weeks, and we'll hear from them. And then we agreed that we would come together in a few weeks to discuss our progress and next steps. So since then, you'll hear from the progress of the working groups. The declaration is just, I think it's in really great shape, but we really want to have input from everybody. And so I'm sure Vishaka and I will talk about this. There are things that need to be added. Maybe there's things that are there that people have questions about. And it really helps to have the former chief legal counsel of the entire United Nations system and Kofi Annan's right-hand man on your team. So thank you very much, Hans Karel, for all of your great input. And we started to develop relationships with some really important and significant potential partners, and you'll hear about that. We've begun to map out our organizational needs, recognizing that we're not trying to build a complex institution or do something that's unnecessarily complicated or expensive. We just need to recognize what do we need to realize our best aspirations. And thanks to a number of people on this call, we've come up with a name, which will also be our URL. And that is One Shared World, and it's oneshared.world, but One Shared World. So we're excited about that. And we've begun to consider some next steps. And that's really essential, because if we just are at the level of declaration, then that's kind of foofy. What we need to say is we're starting with a declaration. And once we agree on this common set of principles, what are the practical applications of those principles that can drive real change in the world? So we have a draft commitment statement, which I can mention later, but it's taken exactly from the declaration. And then we focus on our own process, and what we're aspiring to do is have a process where the goals and the process itself are matched. That we want to have inclusion and co-creation. That doesn't, we have to avoid mayhem, but inclusion and co-creation and mutual empowerment, and allow things to grow, but also to be organic. That as we have new people join us and new voices and new perspective, it's not that they're joining something that's on a single track, that we have to have enough flexibility built in that we can grow with our community. And then the third principle is just speed. This is this moment of plasticity. Who knows what the future holds? There's a slower way of doing all of this, which could be better in a different reality. We have to move very, very quickly. And so a number of people have asked about next steps. Because it's a co-creation process, I think that's up to all of us. But I will say, if we're up to me, here's what I envision as the next steps. First, over the next few days, we finalize this version of our draft declaration. And then we can have a structured amendment process for the future. But Hans pointed out smartly that if we're getting 1 million people to sign on to a declaration, we can't just change it without a process. So we'll do that over the next couple of days. Then the plan is we have our website being created by Jamie Douglas, who's volunteering for that. We'll have it posted in multiple languages with links, and Marie Papazian, Mary's daughter, which is slightly confusing. But Marie and Omar, who's another amazing volunteer, they're working to pull together a link that recognizes so many of the other incredible groups that are working in these areas. And then we're going to have an outreach campaign, both outreach through all of us to our communities, as well as Blair Fitzgibbon, who's just like a superstar media person who is connected with all these kind of big campaigns that you've heard of and worked with Greta Thunberg. He's going to help us with a media launch, and there'll be many of us who will be asked, and I'll talk to some of you later, to be voices, so that our public voices represent all of our diversity. And then, at least as I see it, we'll then relatively quickly pivot from a big, broad set of principles to some specific applications that show what those principles mean. And so Jackie's going to talk about one community that we're hoping to build, where artists will come together and co-create around the theme of interdependence. But then there are two other ideas that we've been actively talking about. One is putting together a strategy, very short document that would be the foundation of a campaign about how to support and strengthen the World Health Organization now, to make sure it has the resources and the mandate to do its job. And I know that there have been many people who've been criticizing the WHO. We really want to support it. But also to say, one of the problems that we have is that going into this crisis, the states of the world hadn't allowed the WHO that we need to be created. And so we don't know whether the next pandemic is just around the corner or already here. So that's one of the areas. Another, and Miguel is starting to think about this, is a campaign to support basically the most significant needs of particularly the Southern Hemisphere countries as the brunt of this crisis shifts, as it likely will, from north to south over the coming months. And it's not just public health. I mean, it's going to be all kinds of infrastructure, employment, food, refugee flows. I mean, there's a lot of things that could get very. A number of people have asked what I think success would look like in 5 years. So again, we're co-creating and evolving, but as I see it, in 5 years, this would be kind of spectacular success. We've championed a set of principles that we've brought to global public consciousness. We've helped build a global coalition of all types of groups working together towards these common goals. Our principles have translated into global campaigns driving tangible changes to address specific existential challenges of greatest common concern. Our platform translates into agendas of national political parties around the world. And we play a leading role helping inspire the creation of capacities or agencies within all governments and the UN, empowered to develop and continuously implement strategies for collectively addressing our greatest common concerns. If you hear this, there's only one word that is appropriately entering your mind, and that word is crazy. It's insane that we could have collectively such a big dream. But when Kant had the first idea of a League of Nations in 1795, that was nuts. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, 2 blocks from the state line, and it was like a non-existent line. In 1854, we had a war where people from Missouri went into Kansas to kill people. And consciousness changes when Robert Schuman and Jean Monnet and others imagined that these European countries that had been at war with each other for hundreds of years could come together and create a European community. That was nuts. They just had gotten out of this horrible war with so many dead. So every big idea starts out sounding crazy. Lots of crazy ideas just stay crazy. But once in a while, there's a big idea where there's the right match of the idea, the people, and the time, when crazy things can become real. And I hope that this is one of those moments. Thoreau wrote that if you've built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them. And that's our business. So on this call, what we're going to do is we're going to have quick presentations from the working groups. We're going to have a discussion about the declaration. We're going to consider a conversation about next steps, and then we'll have some concluding points. So before we get started, we need a little reminder of ultimately why we're all here in the first place. What is the beauty that humans can create that is so worth fighting for? And with that, let me introduce my dear friend and cultural impresario and Asia Society superstar, Rachel Cooper.
Thank you, Jamie. I think that music is so iconic because music is all about listening. And one of the things we're so lacking in this day and age is the deep listening that is about exchanging cultures and understanding history. And so we have two extraordinary musicians who have just put out a wonderful album with Smithsonian, Abigail Washburn and Wu Fei, who are going to share with us. Wu Fei is from China, now lives in Nashville, and plays the guzheng. If you don't know the guzheng, it's 2,500 years and counting, and it's a beautiful zither. And Abigail plays the clawhammer banjo, an instrument originally brought over from West Africa, and now best known as Appalachian. But it's the coming together of their voices and their musics that creates something that I think transcends the kind of diatribes and frictions that are so often a part of the times we're living in. So I hand it over to Abby and Wu Fei.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Faye and I are both
for a wonderful introduction.
And Faye and I are both sequestered on our opposite ends of Nashville. I'm in South Nashville and she's in West Nashville. And our husbands are watching our little children. We were both born the year of the snake. I was born in Evanston, Illinois, and she was born in Beijing, China. And we met in 2006 in a little town in Colorado and exchanged emails, because that's what you did then. And we kept in touch via email. And our life paths just kept crossing. And we ended up becoming mothers and forging into a life of being professional musicians and mothers and everything that comes with that. And Faye, do you want to say anything about how this came together?
Wow. Yeah, well, like we even earlier, what Jamie and Rachel mentioned, that why it came together, because we just wanted to share the things we love about life, about what share the things that have changed our life in the best way and sometimes in the sad way. So that we're artists, and myself, I'm a composer. I've been studying music since I play music since I was 5, and training and growing up in Beijing in the conservatory. That actually learning music back then was quite of the conservatory. You know, I never felt so much love actually for music because my path was decided as a musician by my parents, by others, and coming to America really opened up my mind about, wow, actually, it's not just about, you know, getting in the music schools and competing in music competitions. And, you know, there's actually supposed to be love for music. And without stepping out of my own culture, I would not have had this experience meeting so many wonderful people from playing music from many different cultures. So yeah, that really and then my orbit that somehow orbiting in the universe, and then Abby's orbit was orbiting, and then we just orbit, and then, you know, like how, you know, universe, all those planets, and now we're finally it took a while, but we're finally orbiting together.
Yeah, I started going to China when I was 19, and Chinese studies became my major. And Faye, you started coming to America. You came to America to go to school when you were how old?
I was 21.
So it was really similar. We both really became young adults in one another's native countries. And for that reason, I think when we play music together and just in our friendship in general, the reason we've become so close, like sisters, is that there's a lot of nuance to culture and language that we don't have to explain to each other, and that's really special. And so that's part of the reason we started sitting on my porch in Nashville about 6 years ago, was it? 6 years ago? And
yeah,
dreaming.
Yeah, well, 5 years ago, actually, because we moved here for 5 years.
And we started sitting on my porch in South Nashville and coming up with songs and sharing folk stories and folk songs with each other. And we would find these themes and ideas that just totally resonated and were so harmonious with one another. And we found ways to lie the songs on top of each other and weave them together. And we wish we could do that live for you now, but unfortunately this technology is a 4th second off. And so if we try to play together, it'll be so experimental and like post avant-garde that I think it would be not in line with what we're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah. Nothing's gonna line up. So, but you know, have an open mind to hear this new approach of a free style.
That's great. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so we're going to go back and forth and just share with you a song that we encouraged each other to share when we were sitting on the porch, because one day we were just so tired after trying to get our under 1-year-olds to bed the night before, and I said, what do you sing to put your baby to sleep?
What works? What lullaby do you sing? It's like, oh, well, Abby came up with Water is Wide right away, because that was the songs that she was singing to put Juno to bed. And then immediately I thought, oh, water. And it reminded me of this old song from the He people from Northeast China. They are actually ethnic minorities from Northeast China. Half of them live on the China side, half of them live on the Russia side. And there's total under 30,000 in population. And they're river people that live on the boats. And even 70 years ago, they were still wearing traditional clothes were made out of fish skin. Somehow one of their songs was made super popular in China since I was a kid. And then we started to weave these two lullabies. And then with the vibe of water and waves. And that's how this song came about. Yeah. Should we do it?
Let's do it.
All right. So we call it Water is Wide, Wusuli boat song. Wusuli is the river where the He people live.
The water is wide, I can't cross over, and neither have I wings to fly. Give me a boat that can carry two, and we shall go my child and I.
Wusuli wura, nan yo na be, mian mian di qi shan, la la di shui, yu na ge cang na, lang na ge fei. 鹅和你在船头躺，摇着宝泪。哈啦呵呵哩啦，啊啦呵呵哩啦，呵呵嘞呵哩啦。 啊嘞呵呵哩啦呵嘞，给。
That was amazing. Good job. Woo! That was great. Because everybody's on mute, you can just do funny stuff with your hands to express our love and appreciation. So thank you guys so much. I think that was perfect because the idea of calling out to each other to find the things that connect us across the river of our difference. It's just so perfect. So thank you for sharing that. So it's really wonderful. Great gift. So just one quick thing, we're running a little behind and I want to make sure we have enough time for open conversation. I know that we have this Zoom line until 6:30. So for another hour. I don't want to be too demanding on people's time, but what I'd like to do is, so we'll have these next presentations from the working groups. We may go a bit, not past 6:30, but to like 6:20 Eastern time for like 50 more minutes. So I hope that that's okay with everybody. But I just want to make sure that we have enough time to hear from everybody. So with that, let's go now to our short presentations from our working group, starting with the inclusion and engagement, Miguel and Mary.
So Miguel, do you want to jump in? We didn't plan this. We didn't practice ahead of time. So I'll throw out some ideas and then turn it over to Miguel. But we were originally the young people, and then we decided after several working groups met that it really made sense to bring together the younger generations, the older generations, people from all kinds of communities, people in poverty who are outside of networks, and really thinking about how we can leverage some of these networks to engage a broader group of people in the conversations. I invited my colleague, Lu Chen Li, who you see on the screen, who was served for a long time in international education.
having a
and headed that in
presentation.
What's that? Can you not hear me? We're good? Yeah. At Northeastern. And so, we're going to be really inviting all of you as you have networks and you are looking for ways where we can connect to share some of those ideas with us. Obviously, when we have the web page up and some social media channels, it'll make it easier to start to do that. But be thinking about the networks you have in all of these areas and how you can share them with us, and that will help shape the work of the working group. Miguel, why don't I turn it over to you next?
Yes, thank you very much, Mary. My name is Miguel Lopez de Silanes. Very honored to be here with all of you. Looking forward to meeting all of you in person at some point. So think of us as Mary and myself and the rest of the group. We have around 30 people collaborating with us, many of whom are in this call, as the sales and membership function, right? We are trying to reach out to as many people as we can. Mary with a more, bottom-up approach, approaching, as she mentioned, the poorer and older and younger generations to try to be extremely inclusive. In our case, in the other part of the working group, we are trying to leverage the existing organizations and networks around the world in order to have a very high level of growth, right? That exponential growth in terms of membership. And for that, we have already made a list of around 50 organizations where we have some leeway or a contact or some political, capital that we can use in the future. So the group is also recruiting people. We already have around 30 or so, but we want to have more people. 3 or 4 joined last week, and we have 3 or 4 new candidates. We are increasing this list of organizations. We already have student organizations, business schools, entrepreneur and family business associations, think tanks, a lot of associations related with women, associations of cities, foundations, the Model UN nations, healthcare organizations, global citizen forums, and many more. So we want to ask for your help in any organization that you can think will be helpful for this project, would add value, allow us to grow even more exponentially. We're also working on what are we going to ask these organizations to do. Initially, what we will do is basically we want them to endorse the initiative and we want them to sign the declaration, onboarding as many people as we can, as mentioned, to have exponential growth. So as Mary said, please keep us into consideration when you think of potential networks and organizations and other organizations. Thank you very much. Turn it over to Jamie as well.
Great, wonderful. And next, Jackie Davis.
Yes, hi everybody. I'm Jackie Davis, and I'm the former Executive Director of the Performing Arts Library at Lincoln Center. Before that, the University of Kansas Executive Director for the Performing Arts Center, and before that, the staff of Senator Ted Kennedy. So along with Rachel, we are co-chairing Group 8, and what we are grappling with is how can we best engage creative communities and use arts and culture in our work. And I want to especially thank our small but mighty Group 8 because they are working so hard, and it's just been a pleasure to make new friends that I hope to keep forever. So we firmly believe that the arts and culture are a central activator for our larger community of change. We want to create a space for artists to co-create, thereby connecting their talents to the issues we are all working on together. We want to create a family of artists who will amplify our larger mission. As a group, we have the opportunity to illustrate and connect culture within the context of our mission and our movement. Visual artists, storytellers, musicians, actors, dancers, etc., can provide a megaphone for the principles and issues we will raise. Specifically, we're working to establish a space on Instagram and/or National Geographic story maps where artists around the world can come together and co-create around our mission. We think this is incredibly important. And we want to develop a list of people in the arts and culture community for whom we believe our mission will resonate, and we will develop an action plan to engage them in support of our launch and follow-up activities. I think the most important thing for us to share with you is that we're committed to this effort because we recognize the power of the arts, those well-known and those lesser known. As Rita Blitt, who's I think on this call and an artist herself, reminds us, we are at our best all artists. We recognize that creating awareness is not enough. The work artists create tells stories we as a people will benefit from experiencing. We want to find ways to use the voices of the arts community to rally meaningful action. You will hear more from us as we create a cultural space for our one shared world. So wish us luck. We're on to it.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Jackie. Paula Raymond.
Hi, everyone. And thank you to Jamie for launching us and to Vanessa for keeping us all together so far. I've been asked to give birth to a new subcommittee to help build what we're calling the social architecture for one shared world. And it's really an honor and a blessing to do this. We know that in all successful nonviolent social change movements of the scope that we are, that the means and the ends have to be connected. And therefore the architecture, the social architecture, and the process that we're developing to be with each other, not just on Zoom, but as we kind of take this out in all of its dimensions, we wanted to embody the values that are important to our vision, for our future vision. And therefore, our social architecture needs to embrace the values that we really hold dear. I'm just going to mention a few of them. Ubuntu, which comes from Africa, which means my dignity rests on yours. And we want to have the type of leadership and the type of sharing power with rather than power over that incorporates that notion of Ubuntu. We also want to incorporate the legacy of many other successful nonviolent movements, which embrace unity of diversity. And this is not easy to do, but we have to be committed and find ways to do that, which include really taking the beans out of our ears and listening to one another, paying attention to all the types of divisions that we feel as individuals, in our communities, in our nations, and certainly in our global connections. And it's very, very important as we move ahead together in building this social architecture that we learn how to negotiate, how to move from a very, very inclusive plenary, such as we're having today, right now on Zoom, to working together in smaller working groups that can be both efficient and effective, because we do live within a certain time zone where we want to have our message not only go out, but be able to build something that will really be valuable to all our societies that we're working with. So in moving from the plenary and getting a lot of voices to specific working groups, and then finally, we recognize the importance of having a core group that helps empower the leadership of this as we move forward. And I want to say thank you to Jamie out loud for understanding from the beginning that when we are talking about leadership, and this is very important in today's world, and I'll end here, that the importance of a valued and moral leadership, of a leadership that takes in both humility, but also has vision, and that we find ways of having discussions with each other that might be argumentative at times or have different perspectives, but at the end of the day are nonviolent and peaceful. So to build that social architecture is something that's really exciting to do right now. If there are some of you out there that are particularly interested in strategies of nonviolent organization, it's something that I've worked in my whole life, from the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement and the feminist movement, et cetera, all the way through my work as the director of the Radcliffe Public Policy Institute at Harvard. I invite you to, drop me a note, drop Jamie a note, and let's build this architecture, this great new building of togetherness together. Thank you.
I just love, if we could bottle all the wisdom of everybody in this Zoom, we could fix the entire world, as I hope we will. Deb Devedjian, talking about the digital architecture.
Hi, everybody. I'm very, very fortunate, I guess, to be one of the co-leaders of the Nerd Group. And I say the Nerd Group with lots and lots of love, because I think we come from two different kind of perspectives in trying to pull together everything that you all are talking about. Just by way of background, I was an art history major, and I also have an MBA. So I think what we're trying to do is bring together elements of the humanities, the conversations, the communication, the ability to reach out and connect to people, but at the same time, ensure that there's the appropriate leadership and ability to execute in a pragmatic and effective way that Jacqueline and Paula and our musicians have been able to articulate. And so our group is looking at a number of, and structuring a number of ways of thinking about the necessary infrastructure to enable all of these conversations and initiatives and movements and so on to happen. There seem to be three general categories that are evolving. One is the website, one is basic project management tools, and the third is communications and social media. Within the website itself that Jamie had mentioned, and by the way, I want to thank Beto and Edmund and Klaus and Vanessa and James, Mike, Mark, Alex, and of course, Jamie, for being on this team and making this happen. So the website is in the process of being created as we speak by Jamie Douglas, and the expectation is that we will be able to review the initial declaration. People can sign up. It'll work to help us create a database of people who want to participate as well as people who can sign up. On top of that, there will be a very significant portion of the website dedicated to specific initiatives, whether it's global public health capacity or how do we address the issues surrounding the world's most vulnerable populations, and then some other things that will come up as we organically develop this. And that will be hosted on through the Chisel, which is a series of online communications in a very positive, deliberative decision-making type of form. The second general category in the way of project management, I mean, there are lots of tools in the way of Jira and Zoom and workflow related tools, and so we're sussing them out. And then lastly, with regard to the general communications and social media, whether it's the Instagrams and the Pinterests and the Facebook and so on, there are lots of different ways of addressing different demographics and psychographics, and we're trying to look at a mix of which are going to be the most appropriate. Now, keeping in mind, of course, that at the end of the day, this whole initiative will be successful, not so much because people are on the right platform or using the right little technology or the code is correct, but rather that the ideas resonate worldwide, that we work together productively and constructively and collaboratively, and that the content that we're putting out there actually makes sense. And so I think we want to focus really on the integrity of the content that's being developed and how it's being delivered, as opposed to necessarily the infrastructure, because you can have the most, you have a word process document, but if you're a lousy novel writer, you're never going to write a New York Times best-selling novel. So keeping in mind that it's really going to be about the energies that we put forward, the goodwill, the creativity and the resourcefulness and the leadership, but also the ability to execute on what it is we're trying to do. So we'll be the support tools and hope to do what's going to be necessary to push this all forward. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Deborah. Betsy Fader. Oop. Betsy, are you there?
I forgot to unmute myself.
Oh, okay.
I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Testing everybody's lip reading skills.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to speak for a few minutes about resources and some fundraising and how we're thinking about building some infrastructure along with the others for One Shared World. Thank you very much to Jamie, to Vanessa, and the members of this working group. So we met as a working group to discuss our financial needs, and we agreed that we need to raise a little bit of money to pay for basic infrastructure. So for things like hosting a website, for Zoom, for mailing services, for URL, key services we can't get from volunteers. And we spoke a little bit about how much we thought we should raise, and to get out the gate, we identified $25,000 as the nut to shoot for initially. And this led us to ask what would be the essential basic infrastructure we'd need to process this and to take care of ourselves as an organization. And rather than trying to become a standalone 501c3 and with all the attendant responsibilities that come with that, bookkeeping, administration, and so on, we thought it would make the most sense to work with a fiscal sponsor that could take care of the back office administration, and so that we would not have to worry about it. We could focus our efforts entirely on developing our work, the strategies, and rolling out. We had a call with the Tides Foundation, which perhaps some of you know about this. They take projects on as a fiscal sponsor. They were not the right fit for us because they require a minimum of $250,000 to work with us. And they recommended that we speak with the Social Good Fund. And we had a great call with them earlier this week, and they seem like a perfect fit for us. And Oliver Hack from Social Good Fund is actually on this call, and he was excited about what we are trying to do as well. They would take an 8% commission on the contributions to cover their expenses, but they could also process any contributions from a donate button on our website, which is personally quite exciting to me because it gives us also, as members of this initiative, the opportunity to contribute if we so choose. And I'm saying that Jamie doesn't know I was going to say that, but it does give us an opportunity to contribute if we so choose. And I know I feel excited about that personally. So, let us know your thoughts on working with this fiscal sponsor. If you have any ideas for resources that we should be tapping, or thoughts on our strategy for doing so, we'd love to hear from you. And, again, our goal is really to get the necessary basic infrastructure up and running so that we can focus on the really good stuff, which is the work of One Shared World. We've invited some potential funders onto this call. We hope that you'll help us identify good people to be reaching out to and inviting to join us. And I think that kind of covers my update, James.
Awesome, great. Thank you so much, Betsy. And then now what I think is really one of the essential parts of this call where we need to open up the conversation is to talk about the declaration. And so, as I think we all recognize, the declaration is our core statement of who we are and what our values are. And it's the beginning of our process. So that we're a community coming together around a set of principles. And once we've established those and begin to build community around those principles, then we will pivot to say, well, what does it mean? What are the practical applications of these values? So we've had a really great and open process. And it just, if you compare, like I said earlier, if you compare my first declaration, which I thought just sitting in my apartment, I thought, this is pretty good. And what we have now, it's so much better, and there's so much more wisdom and perspective. So it's great, but it can be even better. Although we have to do it, we have to do that quickly. So with that, Vishaka has been the coordinator of the framing working group, and that's been a very, very passionate. I think it's our biggest group, but we've done amazing work both in that committee, and then a lot of people who aren't in that committee have been. I've had a lot of incoming, and it's all been great. And so we tried to just bring as much wisdom together into this document. So let me then pass it to Vishaka, who's going to lead our conversation. Vishaka and I will lead our conversation over the next 15 minutes. And if you'd like to speak, again, mention in the chat function that you'd like to speak, because we don't see everybody on our screens because there's too many people. So Vishaka, over to you.
Thank you, Jamie. And again, let me just say to my fellow travelers on this group that thank you so very much for your passionate involvement, your connection, and others who have also written. Just before I go any further, let me also say that Vanessa is going to keep an eye out on the chat. So as we open it up, please make sure, and then Vanessa will call you out, and then we'll have a chance to also have other people. So if you are passionate about saying something right in between, raise your hand. If I can see you, we will try to also get you on the line, but we will try to make sure that all of you can speak. So just before I start, I think that first thing I want to say is that we obviously can't do a collective editing in this process. It's way too many people, but lots of people have already given lots of really, really good feedback. So that's going to be very, very important. The second thing is that as it came up from our group, that we want to make sure that this discussion, we want to really do two things. One is we want to make clear that it is a movement that is also for the action that relates, the movement and actions must come together. The second piece is that it is both bottom up and it could also be middle and top. In other words, we need those multiple layers. Not easy, but important. The third thing is that we are really trying hard to say, A, who we are as this community of people, what we stand for, why this initiative, why now, and what we want to do. So that's kind of the categories in which the whole exercise has been kind of organized. And I hope that it comes through for all of you. But let's just open it up to say, generally what you feel it could be strengthened, what is missing, and what you love that you don't want to lose out of this. And that way we'll keep our conversation in those categories and broadly so that we can come back to it rather than word at a time. So we're not going to wordsmith the document. And there are possibilities that you could do, you'll be able to do that. And the last question I have is that the next steps are for us to do, but is there a place that we want to discuss, which is what, as it goes viral, as it goes to the public, should we give examples of things people can do no matter where they are so that they actually can participate and recognize that no matter where you are, you can participate. You can do something. It's not just to sign, but to do something related to that. So let me stop that there. And we see that there are some people already on the chat, so that Vanessa, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and identify people.
Go ahead, Thomas Schmitz.
Hello, everyone. It's a real privilege to be addressing all of you. I just wanted to speak about universal basic income really quickly. I think that's a concept that's really related to what we're talking about here and bringing the whole world together, especially if you consider universal basic income as an economic policy for providing money to everyone in the world as opposed to just everyone in a single country as it's usually phrased nowadays. And one piece I wanted to say about that is that I think it's somewhere on the level of importance of the invention of democracy. I think it's going to be a really valuable contribution to making sure that this movement reaches new heights that our civilization didn't reach in the past. So anyways, that's what brought me into this discussion to all of you in the political landscape from where I was before. So
thank you. I think one thing that we might also want to just remember is that because we're coming at it, it's not just collective, but it's also interdependence that we want to continue to emphasize. Interdependence with parity, that we are in it together. It is not just individuals collectively coming together, but it's across as well. So it's just something to keep in the back of our mind. That would make us different from other kinds of movement or exercise. Okay, Vanessa, who else? You're muted.
Hey, Vanessa, you're muted.
Sorry. I was just saying, no one else is a lot of people contributing to the discussion in chat. Please contribute. Go ahead, Ken.
Again, an honor to be with you all. I have, to your question, 3 things. One, I'd love to have us expand the notion of interconnectedness to people of the future. And I don't mean 2,000 years from now necessarily, I mean next generations. So it's not just we now, it's we and those who will be here after we're gone. Second, I'll bring back up the word empathy. It does not exist, it didn't exist last time, and I want to make sure that this is about empathy as well. And last, if we could cut 1/3 of this out and keep all the richness and content, I'd be happy. I think it's too long for people in the media or other people to start reading. And there's a lot of redundancy, not of words, but we've got the core themes. So great job.
Thank you, Ken.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Tracy.
Tracy, yeah.
Hello. Yeah, I'm here, right here, and just taking out my chat so I can see you all. Thank you so much. I want to thank Rita especially for involving me, and I'd love to see the 50 groups because I think it's really important that we add to them where possible once, I read fully all the documentation, which is, since this is my first call, I haven't had a chance to do so. I've started lots and lots of organizations and initiatives and recognized several of you. And the one caution I would say, and I think we all feel very strongly about this, is that if we, you know, as everything is breaking down and things are breaking through and new initiatives like this as well, if we follow the old blueprint or white print, we will be, all will be lost, a real chance of actually shaping something. So I love what I'm seeing and hearing and you know, your concerns and your initiative and energy, and certainly would like to help in any way I can. I have lots of networks. The one thing I think we have to be very, very attentive to is our diversity from the very beginning. Because if we launch this and it's, you know, there's very light diversity, with all due respect to present company, I think our credibility will be limited, and also our input in terms of the cultural wisdom will be limited. So I just want to make sure that I'm as attentive as you are about remembering that if we continue to construct things with the old blueprint or white print, we're not going to make the kind of systemic change that is so sorely needed, and that includes for the heart. And I'm committed to that path as well with you. So thank you.
Go ahead, Dee.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. It's a great meeting, and it's wonderful to be here again with everyone. And it was a really wonderful experience to work on the text. There are two terms that I've been hearing in the last few days in the foreign policy meetings that I've attended on Zoom like this, that I think we should just be aware of. And they're words that use the term interdependence. One of them is sovereign interdependence, which is an interesting concept that seems to be evolving to mean something that respects the sovereign borders of nation states, as Jamie was saying, but also recognizes interdependence. And so we might want to think about whether that term should be included in some way so that people know that we're au courant with what terminology is. Another term that's a darker term that I have heard in the last few days is weaponized interdependence. And what weaponized interdependence seems to mean is an example that was used in the conversation I was in, which was on foreign policy and technology. And it was an example of a company within another country that owns telecom communications, internet communications equipment, or the routing of internet communications out of one country and into another, which then allows that third-party company, that in this case it was talking about a company with nation-state involvement, to harvest information without people knowing about it. So maybe we want to say something that we want to guard against weaponized interdependence. Again, to show that we understand the terminology that's being used, but also to say that that's something that, you know, is clearly already out there. That's really all I had to say. I think the document's great. Of course, every document can be shorter, and, you know, it's the old thing of if you want 5 pages, I'll have it for you tomorrow. If you want 1 page, give me 2 weeks. So, but I think everybody's done a fantastic job, and thanks to everyone. And to Jamie for making this happen in the first place.
Go ahead, Michael Bonahan.
Aloha. Yeah, so I love the use of the term well-being. I think that the well-being of humankind and of the planet is important as like a vision or a goal as far as the work of this group. And I think the term non-exploitative or supportive and collaborative interdependence would be better than actually using the word weaponized in the document. Non-exploitative, collaborative, supportive interdependence. I'm in with that.
Me too.
Yeah, just let me say that I think one of the things that a number of the people in this group and in our group too have been very careful is that we don't actually go too much only towards political or only towards the social, but how to make sure that the movement itself at the grassroots level is not about a policy document that actually doesn't read very wonkish. So I think that when Ken says, let's remember empathy, I think that empathy, collaborative, these are words that people can relate to. So it's important that we make sure that these words actually are things that have openness to them. At the same time, I understand, Dee, what you're saying, and that is that how do we get those concepts that are coming out in the foreign policy establishments? And that, I think, is the sentiment that can be in the document, not necessarily exactly the same words.
And let me just very quickly interject that we're going to have to move on just so we can get through our agenda. But I'd like just to hear very quickly from two people I see in the chat, but very, very quickly from Jonah and Jim Clark, and then we'll move on. But for this document, the latest version was sent to everybody earlier today in a Google document. And so we would love for you to go into that document and make your specific recommendations. Do it as suggestions inside the document. We'll send a note after the meeting and we'll include that as well. But because this is moving very, very quickly, we'd love to get your comments as soon as possible. So I've written down everything that people have said, but if you have specifics, put them in there. So quickly from Jonah and Jim, and then we'll move on in the agenda.
Hey, everybody again. One quick thing, the global financial system is one of the primary points of engagement of our global citizenship. And unless there is some critique or modification or engagement of the global financial system in the way that we charge transaction fees and who manages that financial system, we are falling short of our ability to have some sort of political teeth in influencing global governance structures, which I think is a good long-term goal for us. There are a lot of other groups working on that. I've just posted a bunch of links.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Jim?
Even though I'm on the group that was working on the document, and I've been so impressed with all the wordsmithing and passion that's gone into it, it really hit me today when two comments were made. One, Ken's comment about the length, and then Jamie, you talking about 1 million people signing this thing. That I don't think this is an accessible size document to have 1 million people or to have a fully diverse group of 1 million people rally around it anywhere near the length that it is. And I wonder if there's a way to think about having a much more condensed statement or kind of Uber declaration that is the core principle document that people can sign on to, and then have on the website, almost the way the Sustainable Development Goals, people can say, I agree with that idea of the Sustainable Development Goals. You don't have to read all the goals to understand what that's to sign on to them. And the reason that also might be useful is when we just talked about the issue of altering and amending the document, I think we could bypass that issue by having the main document be the statement of principles that can be taken from the existing document, and then the sort of supplementary information be the thing that we then are able to much more easily alter and have people contribute to. I really just in a practical, intuitive sense, think that this anywhere near even half the length, publishing this all over, getting people to read it thoroughly, we want people to absorb this and integrate it and have passion for it. I don't think that's going to happen. We may achieve some numerical goals with outreach and marketing and networking, but I think people need to get this document. They need to have the internal passionate elevator pitch version in their head and in their soul. And that's what we want people to sign on to if we're going to have a movement.
Yeah, and so just let me just to move on with this, and we will have a space on the website around the core principles, and that's Deb and the chisel is designed exactly for that. So I think that we can find a way of pulling all of these pieces together with a website, with the declaration. I think the goal of the declaration should be to say as precisely as possible what we believe in however many words it takes to do that. And then to look at the entirety of what we're presenting to the world, which will be exactly as you say, Jim, the core principles, which will be on the website, an engagement space where people will go and debate and converse with each other, and a declaration of whatever length it takes to as efficiently as possible communicate our goals.
Can I just add a very quick comment to that? Then maybe what I'm talking about would be that they sign on to the movement, and that I think is something that people can much more easily do in the millions, as opposed to the document. And then
I think that's
separate
really,
that.
I think that's a smart idea. Our smaller group will look at that. I think it's too big of an idea for everybody, but I think it's a very smart.
It's sort of like last time when I said, we need a mission thing, and I got roped into that. So I would say, let's rope you into it so that you're part of it. Yeah. Okay?
Good. All right. So then this moves us, even if we're maximally successful at whatever the optimal length is and whatever the configuration is, all of the principles in the world don't mean a thing unless they translate into real things that happen in the world. And so I think within the next day or two, we will have a provisional answer. It won't be forever, but to this question. And then the question is, what is our next pivot? And we've talked so far about 3 options. One is creating this co-creative artist space. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. I don't think it's controversial. Another is what I mentioned earlier about creating a specific sub-campaign focusing on World Health functionality. I don't want to say the World Health Organization, but and the question is, how can we maximally support the World Health Organization that exists now, which doesn't have the resources, the mandate to do what needs to be done, especially because there's this big emergency that's about to happen even bigger in the countries that rely more on the WHO for support. But as we do that, how do we think about building this functionality in the world so that we can actually be protected from these kinds of deadly pandemics? And for, as George Church said in an event that he and I did a couple of weeks ago, for all we know, a 10 times more deadly pathogen than the one we're currently experiencing is already out in the wild. So it's not like solve this problem now, solve the big problem later. We have to do both. So that's one idea. And the second, as I talked about earlier, and I know Miguel is thinking a lot about this, how do we think about shifting the brunt of the conversation, especially in these wealthier parts of the world, where here in the United States, we just spent $2 trillion on a 3-month stimulus. What percentage of that would be required to help shore up some basic infrastructure in countries in Africa and South Asia, which are going to be taking the brunt of this soon? But I think beyond health, in the broader set of issues. So those are 3 specific next steps that we could take. So why don't we have about 10 minutes now? Why don't we open the floor for thoughts on specific tangible next steps as we pivot, as we will in the next small number of days, from big principles to trying to make real stuff happen in the world. So same thing, if you want to say something, put it on chat and Vanessa will call on you.
Jamie, just as we wait for people, I think there are 2 things that we should really remember. One is that, for example, with WHO, important as it is, there's lots of work going on. Lots of people are doing things, including the concert that just happened with Global Citizens. I think that we might want to think about what it is that we can do in that sense. I think that Miguel is right, that let's go towards this idea of people who are most vulnerable and where the help is needed and what it could be. And therefore, it would also force us to think about how to get participation from the areas that are not actually right now in this group, So it may be that we kind of try to be very strategic about 1 or 2 things that we can do that actually distinguish what we're trying to do with a whole lot of other people who are already doing stuff, right? So that would be one thing. And the other thing that is, I think, I am very concerned, and I think all of you can help us, and that is that we don't want to sound so broad and so kumbaya-ish that we don't actually show specificity to the kind of action that we also want to suggest, and that we can immediately show that that's where we are. So some sense of priorities of where we are going.
And let me just quickly address your point on WHO, because I know this will make me very unpopular, but I loved that global citizen concert over the weekend. But I thought from the perspective of what we're talking about, it was just other than from the cultural perspective of saying it's wonderful to bring people together around our common humanity. In terms of supporting these structural issues, I thought it was just a monumental failure. They had the entire world attention, and then they said, support your local healthcare providers and give money. And the amount that they raised, $130 million, seemed like a lot of money, but it's nothing compared to the $2 trillion in the stimulus package. And it's nothing compared to what happens when something is really a priority. And so I spoke over the weekend with David Nabarro, who's actually the WHO head of their entire COVID task force. And when I told him what we were doing, he was actually really excited, because nobody is looking structurally. And I think that it's a really important, at least as I see it, a really important point of what we're doing, which is different from these kind of global consciousness, awareness. I think we have to look at kind of the superstructure of power, and what are the pressure points so that we can make real things happen. But to your point, Vishaka, maybe we can march down a few different directions simultaneously, and then let things develop and see what feels like it has the greatest potential to be impactful.
Good, Divya, go ahead and contribute your.
Hi. So I've been listening to a lot of the comments in the chat, and I agree with whomever said that we don't want to get so broad that people don't pay attention. But on the other hand, these issues like health and economy and education are all quite interconnected to the success of any future system. And I think you know this, Jamie, but I really would like to I've been thinking deeply, deeply about structural health changes. And I fear that some of the things I think about may be not entirely, like every culture may not be entirely excited by it. I think we need to make changes, for instance, to prevent zoonotic spread, which is our biggest source of infection right now. I mean, we're finding that we're now infecting our pets. I don't know if you heard that 2 cats had tested positive in New York City, along with the lion and the tiger in the zoo. So things like factory farming, and I do eat meat, so it's not like I'm not making a criticism of everyone, but I'm just saying that we're gonna have to really tackle things that are quite culturally sensitive. But I think it's one of the most important things we do, because the weakest, most vulnerable people on the planet will spread it to everyone anyway. So we have to take care of them. Anyway, so I'm really happy to be part of that initiative. I've just been thinking about it on so many levels, at the hospital level, at the regional level, at the state level, and at the national level. So happy to contribute.
Thank you. Go ahead, Omar.
I just wanted to make a quick point that came out of our discussions in Group 1. I think there's been, over the course of this call, some great discussions about inclusivity and empathy, which are absolutely essential. You know, the language is very important for the broad appeal of this initiative. But going to Jamie's point, in terms of the pivot, once we have a broad appeal, there was a point made by Lars Kluver, who's one of the participants in our group, that I think we should consider for what we do after we get broad appeal. And what he mentioned was that basically participatory democracies exist at the mercy of the ruling majority democratic systems. And his point was that they get influence from decision makers in terms of how much power they have over the populace. So his point was that essentially we should consider politicians at some point in this process as our customers, and we'll need to be able to make an appeal to the politicians in a way that they feel included, and that it's a collaborative system that invites them and views them as the ultimate customers, because they're the ones who are going to be able to empower the type of participatory democracy that we're trying to achieve here. So that's just a point that I wanted to bring up that Lars was mentioning in our discussions.
Thanks. Donna, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you. I'm Donna Hackley, and I actually spend most of my time in Rwanda for about the last 7 years. And I know there are probably many people on the call who are also working in developing nations. And something I hope that we remain cognizant of is having those stakeholders at the table right now during the formation process, because I don't see it sustainable that as an outside group coming into some place and hoping to succeed well. It has to be collaborative, and also each country can customize it and contextualize it for what they need. You know, for example, we're talking about health and the community health worker system, and a lot of these countries is quite strong and they're very connected to their communities. So thinking along a community base and making sure that we have investment from stakeholders right at the start, I think is a great idea.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Thank you. The contribution I want to make really just builds upon what was said by the two speakers before me. There was a global plan of action for Habitat 2. I was on the U.S. Planning Committee for that UN conference held so many years ago, but the issues are still the same. And what comes home to me and what my work for decades has been the impact of housing on health and well-being. And so when you talk about, first of all, a social determinant of health is where you live and how you live. But what came so strongly to me with this pandemic was the studies I've been doing in the city of LA for the past few years on where families live when housing is not affordable. And there was an article 2 weeks ago in the, I think the LA Times or the New York Times about a family of 6 living in a few hundred square feet. And I thought, oh, they're finally going to pay attention to this. But it was an article about a family trying to fight the pandemic, coronavirus, in an Indian slum in Mumbai. And the families that I'm dealing with are living just like that in the center of Los Angeles. And so it's global. And if we're going to try to help protect vulnerable populations from the worst impacts of the coronavirus, then we have to look at the environments in which they're living and tie that in. And that helps pull back out from the cobwebs this incredible global plan of action that was updated or could be easily updated or has been updated in other declarations. But if we don't pull in all of that, how people live, the vulnerable populations in sub-Saharan Africa, in Los Angeles, everywhere, the solutions may be different, but that should be part of what we pull into a pandemic response. The one other thing I wanted to say, I forgot. Sorry, that's what happens when you're my age, but it was important. Okay, never mind.
When you think of it, just put it in the chat.
Yeah.
I will. Darn. Thank you.
All right, so why don't then I know we're running out of time, and if there's somebody who has something, if something is so burning in your heart that you feel like you must speak, just put it in the chat right now. And Vanessa, let me know. Is it okay if we go on? Okay,
yep.
Perfect.
I remember, can I just say it real quickly? We should have global representation from each diverse country, each country around the world to the group.
Yeah, so
that's all. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Let me start there because I literally could not agree with you more. As I think you know, in all of our communications, we've been saying that we are co-creators. And so we've reached out to everybody, and that's been the first order of business in every one of the working groups to say that however you see diversity, you are responsible for recruiting that diversity. And so certainly I've been trying, a number of us have been trying. Paula was helping us to get the former health minister of Liberia, and they were just on this call, and there was a logistical issue. But I totally and completely agree about the diversity point, and so that's all of our responsibility. If there's any manifestation of diversity, whatever it is, by age, by country, by whatever, please let us think of this as all of our responsibility. So if you know somebody who should be part of it, great. If you don't know them, but you think they should be part of it, you are a co-creator. Invite them, follow, heckle them, do whatever it takes. But everybody is right. It's got to be our top priority, and it has to be all of our responsibility. So please feel empowered about that. In terms of the declaration, I think it does make sense to have as long of a declaration as makes sense, a shorter statement of kind of core principles, and then just like a join us, because it's not like this is the United Nations where a state needs to be an actual signatory and then you sign in reservations. We're representing a common set of principles. I think that was a great point by Jim. Having said that, on our declaration, I think it will be important to have names associated with it. And so because we'll want the world to know who we are. And so once we have the declaration, then we're going to send it out to everybody, and we have 24 hours more, and we'll send a revised version after this and after hearing from you for the rest of the day. But then we'd like to get people to sign on and to send your names, and we'll talk about that process. Once we have that, translations, and Hans and others have mentioned that, are really important. We have Spanish, Dutch, and Hindi covered. But if you are able to either do or secure a relatively quick translation into a language that you think appropriate, and the more the better, please oh good, Edmund Chung just got Chinese, so we're growing. Which is really important. But if you have a language that you don't see represented, again, beg, borrow, or steal, but we want to have as many of those as possible. Next, we're going to be posting the video, if people are okay with it, of these two group calls. We'd like to post them on the website, but we can edit them out. And so if you are someone who spoke in either the last meeting or this meeting, and you're uncomfortable with being public, please let us know and we can just edit that out. But I just think my personal view is if we put something out in the public and it's not clear who we are or what the process is, I just think that's going to hurt us. But if there's an issue for anybody, please let us know. Next, as I mentioned, Mary Papazian has her daughter, Marie Papazian, is our first intern. We also have volunteers, Omar and amazing Vanessa. So now we've declared that we have an internship program. And so everybody, if you have superstar young people who had internships and are at home looking for a mission, we'll take as many of them as we can handle. We pay with what my grandfather used to call trumperdink. He used to say, you can't live on trumperdink. I think it meant good deeds, but I've made it this far, so we'll see. But for trumperdink, we would love to have people. Next, many of you are already on working groups, but we'll do this same process. If you're not already on a working group, I'm gonna just list the names of a working group and just write this word in the chat if you want to join. So there's the first, it's just write framing if you want to be part of the framing group that Vishaka was talking about. The social architecture group, just write social architecture. That's Paula's group. The digital architecture group, that's Deb DeVegin's group. The inclusion and engagement, write the words inclusion and engagement, and that's Miguel and Mary. Arts and culture is Jackie and Rachel. And funding, which I'm sure everybody wants, but I think we need a little bit of funding. Then put that, and that's Betsy's group. So with that, that brings us actually with 1 minute to go before the promised time to what we call loving global mayhem. And so what I invite everybody to do is, because this has been incredible etiquette, please unmute yourself. All right, everybody, hold on. Everyone unmute yourself. Unmute. I can see who hasn't done it. All right. And now everybody in your own language, in any language, at the same time, unleash the loving mayhem of global interdependence.
Unleash the loving mayhem of global interdependence.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, everybody.
I tried to ask for the floor.
Oh,
through
hold
the
on.
chat.
Oh, yes, please, Hans.
Hold on.
I know, Hans.
Hold on one moment for Hans.
It doesn't work. The chat doesn't.
Release.
I can't send messages.
Mayhem.
That
Okay, go ahead.
In the declaration, and that is that what states have failed is to introduce fully democracy and the rule of law. And I think that should be mentioned in the resolution. Kofi Annan and I discussed this very much when he was Secretary General, and also after when we worked in Kenya to assist them after the disastrous presidential election in 2007. So I think it's important to stress that too. Thank you.
I'm going to raise one question just for us to think about. We won't answer it now, but maybe people can stick around on chat. And that is, if we raise the issue of global democracy and rule of law, which I think everybody on this call passionately believes in, do we politicize our efforts for people who are in the countries where that's an issue? And I'm not giving an answer. That's the question. But I think so maybe just on your chat, people can mention. So now we're going to re-release the loving mayhem of global interdependence as we close down the call. So thank you, everybody. I think this was great, and we're really doing something wonderful together.
Thank you. Thank you, Hans.
Thank you.
Build a better world together.
Yes. Yep.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao, ciao.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Jamie's mom.
Bye.
Bye, hello.
See you soon on working group calls.
All right. Perfect. All right. Signing off.
Okay.
Bye, Jamie.
God, how do I sign off?
Bye.